Welcome to our reading lesson. Let's get started by reading our learning target. I can explain how images support the words in a text to show and describe information. Remember, explain means to make clear with details. So I can give details on how the images support the words. Let's look at that word, images. An image is a picture or illustration in photographs that are in a text. So I can make it clear how these images support, how the pictures or illustrations support the words. Support means to help explain or provide evidence for a main idea in a text. So I can make it clear how the images, the pictures, the illustrations, help explain or provide evidence for the words in the text. This week, we've been looking at an image, specifically the text feature of a diagram. A diagram is a simple drawing that is used to explain something, okay? So it's a certain type of image. It's a drawing that's used to explain something. Now, we know that the words in the text are what the author wrote, and when we're looking at an informational text, we're looking at real, true facts and information. This week, we've been reading science articles, so we've been learning about the way that things work. Yesterday, we learned about the inclined plane and how the inclined plane works. What is an inclined plane and how does it work? The inclined plane is a ramp that goes from a lower location to a higher location on a smooth ramp, right? There are no bumps or indentions in there. Inclined planes are used to make jobs easier. It's used to help us get things from a lower place to a higher place easily without having to do heavy lifting. Today, we're going to read about another type of simple machine that helps us to do things. This is probably the most common simple machine that you probably already know a lot about. So here we have Wheels and Axles by Ed Green. What do you already know about a wheel and axle? You probably already know that a Ferris wheel has a wheel and axle. You can look at that picture. Your car has a wheel and axle, okay? Bicycles have wheel and axles. Go-karts have wheel and axles. Dirt bikes have wheel and axles. Bicycles have wheel and axles. There are a lot of things that we use every day that have wheel and axles. Now, you might not completely understand how a wheel and axle works. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to learn specifically how a wheel and axle works. We're going to read about how it works in the text, and then we're going to use the diagram to help us with being able to visually see how that wheel and axle works. So what you're going to do is you're going to read through this text for the first time just to understand what this article is about. So you can read through this by yourself, with someone, to a stuffed animal, but I want you to read through the text, Wheels and Axles. When you're done, you may unpause the video. All right, now that you've read through the text, Wheels and Axles, just to understand what the article is telling you, we're going to answer some questions to make sure that we understand what it is that the author wants us to know. What is this article mostly about? Remember, when we're trying to find what something is all about, we're finding the main idea. So what is the main idea of this text? The main idea of this text is how a wheel and axle works. We're talking about a wheel and axle in each paragraph of this text, so it's all about how the wheel and axle works. What simple machines use wheels and axles that we may find at home? This is not a question that we're going to use based on our prior knowledge. This is a question that we're going to answer in the text. So I'm going to ask it again now that you know we're focused on just the text. What simple machines use wheels and axles that we may find at home? Okay? All right, so I'm going to look in paragraph number 2 to find those items with wheels and axles that we have around our house. Cars and bicycles, skateboards, but I wouldn't include a Ferris wheel because we don't find that around our house, do we? So the items that have wheels and axles around our house are cars, bicycles, and skateboards. How does a wheel work? How does a wheel turn? Okay? It says that a wheel turns because it has a rod and an axle, and the axle goes through the center of the wheel. So the way that the wheel turns is by having an axle through the middle of it, and when the axle turns, it causes the wheel to turn, okay? All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out, well, you don't even have to get out a blank piece of paper. Right over here, I want you to draw a circle. All right, we are going to find the center of this circle. The center is the middle point of a circle or a sphere. The center of the ring is where your finger fits. So I want you to find the center of the circle. It's that middle point of the circle there. So when we go back and read this sentence, the axle goes through the center of the wheel. We know that the axle goes through that middle part right there, okay? All right, there's another word that I want us to look at, and we've talked about this word simple several times. Simple means plain, basic, or uncomplicated in design. So when we're talking about simple machines, it's an uncomplicated design, okay? All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to go back this time, reading through this text. Now that we have an understanding, we're going to go through this time and really focus in on a specific part of the text that can be answered or told more about with this diagram here. Let's focus on our closed reader habit. The question says, how does a wheel and axle work? That word how means the way that it's done. So in what way does a wheel and an axle work? We're going to put a box around the paragraph that tells how it works. And then we're going to circle the labels on the diagram that show the two parts of the machine, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back through and read. And I want you to put a box around the paragraph that tells how the wheel and axle works, okay? All right, go ahead and take your helper finger and put it on the first word in the first paragraph. A. Ready? I want you to read this with me. Ready? Read. A simple machine has few or no moving parts. One kind of simple machine is a wheel and axle. A wheel and axle can help move people or objects from one place to another. Does this paragraph tell us how the wheel and axle works? It tells us what a wheel and axle can do. It can help people or objects move, but that doesn't tell us the way it happens, okay? Let's keep reading in paragraph number 2. Wheels and axles are all around you. Cars and bicycles have wheels and axles. A skateboard has them. Even a Ferris wheel is really just a big wheel and axle. Does paragraph number 2 tell us the way it works? What does paragraph 2 tell us about the wheel and axle? It gives examples of the wheel and axle, doesn't it? Let's move on to paragraph number 3. This simple machine has a large wheel. It also has a rod called an axle. The axle goes through the center of the wheel. When the axle is turned, the wheel also turns. Does this tell us in what way a wheel and axle works? Yes, so we should have a box around paragraph number 3. It tells us in what way that the wheel and axle works. Let's go back and read that paragraph again, and then let's go back and circle the parts of our diagram that show us how a wheel and axle, what a wheel and axle needs to work, okay? The simple machine has a large wheel. It also has a rod called an axle. The axle goes through the center of the wheel. When the axle is turned, the wheel also turns. So go and look at our diagram. Now, which diagram helps us to know how the wheel and axle works? This is just a picture of an example of a Ferris wheel, but this is the diagram that explains to us how the wheel and axle works. So what are the two parts that a wheel and axle needs to be able to work? It needs a wheel, or two wheels, could be one or two, and then it needs an axle. Do you see these red arrows here? What do those red arrows show us in the diagram? The red arrows show us that when the wheels turn, or when the axle turns, the wheels turn. And I got that from my text down here. When the axle is turned, the wheels also turn. So when the axle is turned one way, then the wheels will also go that same direction. So those arrows show us that visual a little bit more, okay? All right, guys, now what you're going to do is you're going to go and you're going to answer questions number 1 and question number 2, okay? All right, it says on the next page, we're on page 301. 301. Page 301 has a buddy hint here. He helps us think about things that we need to know as we're answering these questions. It says, after I reread the text, I'll look at the diagram. It will tell me more about what I've read. So we read the words in the text and then we look at the diagram to help us understand more, just like we just did with our closed reader habit. All right, you're going to go ahead and answer question number 1. Which sentence from the passage does the diagram help to explain? Okay, go ahead and answer that question. When you're done, you may unpause the video. All right, so a wheel and axle can help people or objects from from one place to another. Does the diagram show us that? That's a detail from the text, but it doesn't show us how the wheel and axle move. So A is not it. B, wheel and axles are all around you. Well, that's true, but the diagram doesn't show us examples of them being all around us, okay? The wheel and axle diagram shows us just the wheel and the axle and those arrows. Cars and bicycles have wheels and axles. That's true, but does the diagram show us that? No. D, the axle goes through the center of the wheel. Does the diagram show us that? Yes, the diagram shows us that we have an axle that goes through the wheels, okay? All right, go ahead and answer question number 2. How does the diagram add to what the author tells us? Okay, so think about the words that the author gave. How does the diagram help us to better understand the words? All right. It shows that the machine can have 2 or more axles. Did the diagram show us that? The author didn't even talk about having 2 or more axles, so that is not correct. B, it shows that the axle must be long and heavy. No, the diagram doesn't indicate whether it's long or heavy, does it? It doesn't talk about the size. C, it shows that the wheel and axles turn in the same direction. The words told us that in that last sentence of paragraph number 3. When the axle is turned, the wheel also turns. Did the diagram show us that? Yeah, it showed us that with those red arrows. So let's put a star beside that to make sure that there's not a choice that might answer the question better. It shows that many things around us have wheels and axles. The diagram doesn't have a picture of many objects with wheels and axles. The text did talk about that, but the diagram did not show that. The diagram did show that when the wheels turn, that the axle also turns. Okay? All right, now let's go ahead and go to the talk section. The article says that wheels and axles can help people move or objects from place to place. what does this mean? So what does it mean for the wheel and axle to help people or objects move from place to place? The hint tells you to look for examples of things that use wheels and axles. So when you find those examples, then that will help you understand what it means by people or objects moving from place to place. Go ahead and pause the video and answer that question. When you're done, you may unpause. So what it means with help people or objects move from place to place, we look at the example of cars and bicycles and even skateboards. Cars and bicycles and skateboards even can help people get from place to place. It can help us get from our house to the store. It can help us get from our house to the doctor, right? That shows how people move from place to place. We also have trucks, right? Trucks weren't mentioned here, but it does say cars. We know that trucks are a type of transportation that can move objects. Groceries can be found in trucks. Cars can be found on trucks. Remember, we talked about that yesterday with the inclined plane. It helps us to get those objects from place to place. So that is what it means by helping people and objects get from place to place. It moves different things by carrying them there using that mode of transportation. All right, guys, you are going to answer question number 4. Question number 4 says, how does this article help you understand how wheels and axles work? Remember that word how means in what way? The way that it's done. So in what way does this article help you understand how wheels and axles work? You should use one detail from the diagram and one detail from the text. I can't wait to see what you have learned from this article and the diagram on wheels and axles.